Okay, so today we're diving into a story that honestly feels like it's straight out of a sci-fi movie. We're going to unpack a very real and pretty scary technological battlefield. The big question is, how in the world did Iran manage to jam Starlink, the one network everyone thought was unjammable?
So let's set the scene. The date is January 8th, 2026. It's 8:30 p.m. in Tehran. The city lights are on, but something way more important just went dark. For the entire nation, the digital world, well, it just blinked out of existence. And you have to understand, the sheer scale of this was just mind-blowing. We're not talking about your average internet outage. In an instant, 85 million people were cut off. It's like someone found the delete button for an entire country's connection to the world. So right away, people knew this was something different. Analysts were calling it the first satellite war in human history. But here's the twist. The weapons weren't missiles, they weren't drones, they were invisible, completely silent electromagnetic waves. A whole new type of war had just begun.
All right, so who are the main players in this crazy digital showdown? Well, in one corner, you've got Elon Musk with his massive constellation of over 9,000 Starlink satellites. And in the other corner, you have Iran. But they weren't fighting alone. They came armed with some seriously sophisticated electronic warfare tech from Russia and China.
Now, to really get why this is such a big deal, you got to remember what Starlink is all about. It's this huge network of satellites whizzing just 550 kilometers above our heads. And its whole purpose is to beam internet directly to you, anywhere on Earth, completely bypassing government firewalls and censorship. It's supposed to be unstoppable.
And here's the thing. Starlink had this reputation, right? It was earned back in 2022 during the invasion of Ukraine. Russia, a global superpower, tried everything to jam the network, and they failed. Again and again. SpaceX engineers would literally push out software updates in just a few hours to sidestep the attacks. That's what created this whole myth of Starlink being invincible.
And that right there is the big mystery. It's the central puzzle. If a military powerhouse like Russia couldn't shut down the network in a full-blown war, how on earth did Iran pull it off? It's the paradox that left security experts around the world totally stunned.
So, the billion-dollar question: how did they do it? What was their secret? Well, the answer isn't just about technology. It's about motivation. To really understand the how, we first have to look at the why.
And that why had been building for years. See, in late 2025, huge anti-regime protests exploded across Iran. The government knew from past experience that just flipping the off switch on the internet wasn't going to cut it anymore. Back in 2019, videos of crackdowns still got out. In 2022, during the Masa Amini protests, it was Starlink itself that let the world see what was happening. So this time, they knew they had to do something bigger. They had to jam the sky.
Okay, so what were these secret weapons? Well, Iran's success wasn't just one thing. It was this deadly cocktail of 3 different super advanced technologies, all working together in perfect sync.
First up, let's talk hardware. You've got the Krasika 4. This is one of Russia's top-tier electronic warfare systems, and it was reportedly given to Iran in 2025. What makes it so dangerous is that it can jam the very specific Ku and Ka band frequencies. Think of them like the private radio channels that Starlink satellites use to talk to the terminals on the ground.
But wait, there's more. They didn't stop there. They also had the Murmansk BN, another beast of a Russian system. This one has an absolutely insane range of 5,000 kilometers. Its job is to just blast a huge area with interference, disrupting all sorts of high-frequency radio signals. It adds this massive, powerful layer to the whole electronic attack. And finally, you have the playbook, the actual strategy. A few months before all this went down, Chinese researchers published a paper, and in it they laid out a detailed theoretical plan for how to shut down Starlink over Taiwan. The idea was to use hundreds of jammers all working together to totally flood Starlink's communication channel. And it looks like this wasn't just some academic paper collecting dust on a shelf. It was the instruction manual.
All right, so they had the weapons. They had the playbook. How did the attack actually go down? Well, this wasn't just a brute force smash. It was more like a carefully planned, high-stakes chess match played with invisible pieces.
It was a really clever 2-step process. Step 1, blind the target. They jammed all the GPS signals. You see, the little Starlink dishes on the ground need GPS to know where in the sky to look for the satellites, which are moving super fast. By jamming GPS, Iran basically put a blindfold on every terminal. And then, once they were blind, came step 2. They hit them with the big jammers on the Ku band frequencies, cutting the actual connection between the dish and the satellite.
And man, the results were fast and just brutal. This chart shows what we call packet loss, which is basically just the percentage of your data that gets lost and never makes it. At 8:30 p.m., they were already at 30% loss, but just 90 minutes later, by 10 p.m., that number shot up to 80%. The network was, for all intents and purposes, completely broken.
Now, you know SpaceX wasn't just going to sit there and take this. Their engineers, brilliant as they are, pushed out a software update almost immediately to try and get around the jamming. And for a little while, it worked. But then, the packet loss started climbing again. And this is the key. Iran's hardware was adapting in real time. As fast as SpaceX could code a solution, the jammers would change their tactics. It was a live duel between agile software and just overwhelming adaptive hardware.
But maybe the most chilling part of this whole thing wasn't the technology itself, but how surgically they used it. This wasn't some clumsy nationwide pull-the-plug blackout that would tank their own economy. This was something else entirely. This is what experts are now calling a smart blackout. Think of it like a digital scalpel, not a sledgehammer. Cities with major protests, like Tehran, were totally jammed. But out in rural areas, some people still had a connection. All the government websites and state-run media, they stayed online, no problem. They even had a whitelist to make sure critical things like banks and hospitals weren't affected. It was pure surgical precision.
And this new strategy, it has a name. It's called Calibrated Electromagnetic Denial. It is a precision-targeted shutdown where the jamming is calculated and aimed based on things like how many people live in an area and how intense the protests are. It's a whole new playbook for authoritarian control in the digital age.
And this quote from an analyst really just hits the nail on the head. Tehran appears to have succeeded where Moscow failed. By doing what a global superpower couldn't, Iran didn't just silence its own people. It sent a shockwave around the world and shattered that myth of Starlink's invincibility.
So, where do we go from here? Because this story is far from over. What we're seeing is the very beginning of a new and escalating arms race, but it's not being fought with bombs. It's being fought over information itself.
The fight going forward is pretty clear, right? On one side, you've got SpaceX's biggest strength. It's software. They have these amazing, agile algorithms and adaptive beams. But on the other side, you have Iran's advantage. Pure, raw, military-grade hardware that can just physically overwhelm the signal. And look, any engineer will tell you, software has a really hard time winning a fight against pure, brute force hardware.
And all of this leaves us with one big, unsettling question for the future. Starlink was built on the promise that it could make this kind of information control impossible. And Iran just proved that with the right tech and the right allies, maybe nothing is impossible. So in this century, when technology is power, who actually gets to win the war for the narrative?